And I knew it was going to be mid-30s, and I'm not great in the heat. So on the first day, on the first hill, within the first 4 hours, and I was really struggling, I knew that I had basically just had to reset any expectations that I'd had of being able to ride fast up hills to how am I going to survive this heat? Because it ended up being a heat wave, and the locals were like, wow, this is hot. I think my Garmin topped out at 48 degrees.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of the Seek Travel Ride podcast, Liz Hughes. I first came across Liz through social media when I was researching ultra-endurance cycling. I noticed she'd featured up at the pointy end of a few events and knew she was an athlete for me to keep an eye on. But you'd be very wrong to think that Liz's experience on two wheels only extends to the ultra scene. Liz has been a bike messenger and started off her racing career as a mountain biker whilst living in Australia. Since then, she has raced on the road circuit in the UK before shifting her focus back to the dirt with cyclocross events and gravel adventure rides. Now Liz has combined her passion for cycling into her career, where she is an accredited cycling coach and mountain bike guide with a specific passion for helping more women to participate in the sport. So, without further ado, Liz, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
It's super awesome that I get to speak with you today, Liz, because I am really keen to explore so much of that varied cycling history and your backstory. But before we get into it, I know that you have just finished up with the Dales Divide. How's the recovery going from that?
It's going pretty well, actually. I did go to the physio this morning, as if anyone already knows me and followed it, that I had some back problems. So whilst that's not debilitating, still something that needs sorting out and addressing before I go off and have another big adventure later this summer. So that was fruitful. Had some good chats with my physio, who's always really excited when his clients go off and do crazy things, because I think it's the cash register ringing for him when we do.
Oh, I could only just imagine. And look, we are going to get into a lot of, what you're recovering from and what you're building up to later on in the show. But really, and this should be my first question and that I ask all of my guests, Liz, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
I don't know if it was my first bike, but the one I remember, it was a step-through frame, and I think I was probably about 5 or 6. It had 3 Sturmey Archer gears, and it was sparkly and purple. And I think my dad was really, really excited for me to have this bike. And given I've never really been a particularly feminine person, I hated it.
I was waiting for something like that to come out. First, I'm hearing Sturmey Archer gears, which for those who don't know are like a grip shift, like twist shift sort of gears, right?
Oh no, this is probably older than that. This had it's just a little tab on the handlebars.
Oh, like a little thumb press or something like that. Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
About the same time, my brother got a little BMX, and I just wanted the BMX. I was so jealous.
Did you ever just take off on his BMX anyway?
Of course I did. He's littler and younger than me.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it. And you say, here, have this purple bike. I want yours. What colour was the BMX?
It was black, red and yellow, so like flames, racy kind of style.
Because I also had a BMX growing up as a kid, which was a hand-me-down. It was, it went through my brothers and then my sister before it went through to me. And it was black and yellow. And I had many adventures on that too. So I feel like we may be BMX soulmates there in our little childhood ways.
Well, at the time, I was also so into roller skating. And I had a pair of red and rainbow roller boots with the wheels in each corner and a little stopper on the front. And my neighbours all called me Starlight Express, which at that age, I had no idea what that was.
I just got this little vision of you as a kid, just having just a big grin on your face, just roller skating away and stuff like that too. Do you still roller skate now?
No, not recently. Very occasional ice skating when I go and see relatives in Finland in the winter. But yeah, which translates quite nicely. Yeah, I haven't done it for a while.
Brilliant. And so just quickly though, and I know this is a tangent, but are we talking ice skating in Finland like on like a lake, or are we talking about like an indoor sort of ice skating rink or outdoor rink or something?
Yeah, outdoor, on lake. Sometimes if there's not a local lake, they'll spray water over a car park, like in town centres, and just do a couple of layers of that and it will be there all winter.
Definitely will. Actually, I have a friend who is based in Finland in Espoo. Hello, if you're listening. And I think she's excited because I think spring may soon be starting and the snow may be finally melting forever very soon. So it's a happy time of the year if you're coming out of the darkness in Finland, that's for sure. Liz, notwithstanding the adventures you had as a little child there on your bike, on the VMX bike and not the purple step through, I know that the bike has been a part of your life for a long part of it anyway. Firstly, as a means of getting from A to B, really, didn't you? Like, you were a cycle commuter first and foremost, weren't you?
Yeah, so that is where it all started. So I think when I came to London to go to university, and then a little while after that, didn't really know what I was going to do when I left university. So just started working retail jobs. So not a lot of money. So I started commuting on my borrowed flatmate's bike, which we affectionately called the death trap because the brakes didn't work particularly well. And none of us in the flat knew how to fix that at this point. I don't think I was going fast enough to cause damage to myself or anyone, but...
I just love that you've had an affectionate name of the death trap. Have you sort of like got a foot ready to come out at last minute when a lorry pulls out not looking at you or something like that, I'm sort of figuring.
Yeah, always ready for death and danger on that thing.
So cycle commuting to work as a means of saving money and a different way of transport.
Yeah, and it kind of snowballed from there really. So I ended up buying my own bike that actually had brakes that worked better, which was nice. And then it was just so much easier and faster than getting around by public transport. And getting across from one side of London to the other just takes hours, even on the tube, it's so long. So that was my way of getting around. Even though I was working for like fashion brands as a merchandiser, sort of working up through retail, all my clothing kind of started shifting away to be a bit more multi-purpose than like heels and dresses. And then by the time I kind of bought the bike that I eventually couriered on, which I still didn't know much about bikes at that point, but it was like so much lighter and faster. I didn't have any gears or anything heavy on it. Couldn't really think about getting around by any other way. So it's sort of like in my handbag, there would be a little toolkit and a puncture repair kit. And
well, that is so cool. It's funny actually because I cycle commuted a little bit back in Australia. In fact, my cycle commute became so ridiculously short it was pathetic. And initially I got like an old upright Gazelle Dutch bike because that meant that it was such a short commute. I could commute in my office clothes. It was a step through and everything. But eventually I would, because of just how I am, find the long way to go to work where instead of going the direct 3.5 kilometre commute, I might take the 30 kilometre zone detour, which I remember at one stage and thinking, I bought this bike so I could wear my work clothes, but I'm going so far on this heavy thing that I actually need to get changed and shower beforehand. So the bike was not necessarily fit for purpose, but I loved it all the same. So you transitioned from commuting to work in the fashion industry. You did then turn to being a cycle courier, didn't you?
Yeah, so the trouble with working in the fashion industry or just sort of retail of any kind is that you are very susceptible to recessions. So I'd actually gone travelling with my boyfriend at the time and quit one job, kind of expecting to be able to come back and just say I was ready to take the next step on that corporate ladder. I came back and it was during one of the big financial crises and so many companies in the UK just gone under whilst I was away. And it was kind of a bit of a difficult time for me as well because our savings were devaluing whilst we were away as well. So I came back and I was just a bit stuck really. So I was still riding around everywhere on my lovely bike. My friends were like, this is a thing, this is a job. Why don't you just do that rather than being on Job Seekers? And I was like, oh yeah, that's the thought. And yeah, it started there. I started in December and the first day it rained pretty much all day. The next day, I bought some very, very cheap waterproofs from an army surplus during the middle of the day, cut them off so they were rideable in, and went around looking like a complete lunatic in these like fatigues.
Is that a hack though, going to an army surplus store for waterproofs as opposed to like an outdoor store?
It was like 15 quid instead of like, if you then went in at a bike shop, you were paying like at least £100 at that point.
Definitely. You needed to find a decathlon.
No decathlons on circuit in the centre of London, unfortunately. So, like, I'd still a go-to if I'm like, I need something cheap just for a quick. Army surplus is definitely the way to go. Yeah, then I think it's like several days in, it snowed at the end of my shift, and it was really interesting and slippery, and was kind of like falling over everywhere because this was unexpected. Nothing was gritted. And that snow stuck around as ice for about 3 weeks. So it was a really interesting start, and I fell over a lot.
Yeah, I think I've heard about this phenomena in the UK specifically, because you get to a stage where if it snows at a certain point in winter, you get through that sort of frost thaw cycle with the snow where it sort of freezes over again overnight and then becomes ice and then sort of thaws out to become puddles of water, which then ices over again. I imagine that's what you were experiencing?
Yeah, it was particularly brutal winter, that one though, and it didn't really go above freezing for like that whole pretty much 3 weeks. So every time you went into a cul-de-sac or, you know, like off a main road, you didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know whether it was going to be icy or fine, so you slid out of a lot of corners.
I wonder whether, because if I think of a quintessential bike messenger in my mind, if I'm to close my eyes and vision what I picture a London bike messenger to be, I picture somebody on a fixie, no brakes, all style, really good at cycling skills and stuff like that, fast paced off the lights, weaving in and out of traffic. So I imagine some of that cycle courier culture probably, did it start rubbing off on you, or were you this way inclined with some of your riding anyway?
I think it started off gradually where I was pretty timid. I can hold my own in traffic. And going back to what you were saying about taking the long route to work, my commute experience was like, I needed to get to work as quickly as possible because I'd left 5 minutes late every day consistently. So I was kind of trying to be quick anyway. So it was kind of like a gradual kind of process, really. Like, I started off and it wasn't fixie, I had it as a single speed, but then I wore out my brake pads because I knew nothing. And I was like, oh, hang on, brakes don't work. They're making a horrible noise. So I was just like, I'll turn it into a fixed and buy some brake pads. So flick the wheel over. And then I was like, oh, I'm riding fixed. This is slightly scary, but it seems okay. And then you'd start seeing things differently. So as you do the job longer, you start, instead of seeing the cars, you see the gaps around the cars. And actually, this is a way that I think a lot of the advanced blue light drivers in police and ambulances are taught to see things as well, that you're not looking at the vehicles. You can kind of know what they're doing anyway without really focusing on them. You're looking for the gaps and whether you can fit through that gap, basically. So my partner now finds it very interesting to ride with me because I'll just ride through stuff. And he's like, I can't do that. I'm like, you can fit. And he's like, no, like mentally, I can't do that. So, I mean, I did it for 3 years and it just kind of like, it was just a gradual progression of being just able to ride a bike in a more skillful way over that time.
Notwithstanding it was absolutely freezing, but what a baptism of fire for that very first few months as a cycle courier to be dealing with ice and snowy roads in central London. I mean, but I imagine what I was sort of interjecting with there about talking about the skills of cycle couriers is when I look at what you've done in cycling, there is an element where you need to have some great handling skills to progress far and to feature where you do in result sheets as well. So I wonder whether that's all been slowly building up in your repertoire. You didn't realise it at the time, but you're on this crash course. But you were building up a skill set that's actually held you in good stead now, which you're actually passing on to others.
Yeah, definitely. And you just kind of just build on it. You can't ride a bike pretty much for 9 hours a day, sometimes longer, depending on where you live. You can't ride a bike for 9 hours a day without actually some of that just coming on anyway, because if you are not great at it, you don't make enough money to survive as a courier, and then you fall off a lot and you probably just want to go like, maybe this isn't for me. And you know, once you get to know people, you can see how they ride, emulate stuff. learn more about bikes off of people. So I learned how to build bikes during that time, how things work. I hung out with frame builders. I played bike polo for a bit before I realised that I didn't really like falling off during bike polo because it would injure me for work.
I'm just thinking, you build up the skills and repertoire. If the Death Trap bike still existed, you could have fixed the brakes.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't know. My flatmate got rid of that pretty soon after I stopped riding it. He's got a better bike now.
So, Liz, you went from cycle courier, and then, if I've got this right, maybe I've got it back to front, but did you then go to Australia and go into a total different environment in that you're no longer in the busy hustle and bustle of London, weaving in and out of cars, to being in sort of more remote country areas of Australia?
Yeah, pretty much spot on. So whilst I was a courier, I met another courier who happened to be from Australia on a visa. We got married. I decided to give living in Australia a chance with him. So we lived in a little back town called Mullumbimby, which is kind of near Byron Bay, New South Wales, northern border. It's sort of semi-tropical there, so really, really lovely weather for cycling at all points apart from the summer where it rains and it's 40 degrees.
And you get the sort of big summer storms rolling through on a regular pattern up in that area as well.
Yeah, so had a few being flooded in and a few like not having electricity for weeks because of the storms.
Dealing with something very different from the frost thaw, snow cycle and ice in London to water of a different problem with the heat as well.
Reverse seasonal affective disorder. Like you can't really go out and do that much during the summer because a lot of the time it's just actually quite dangerous if like the rain is so heavy no one can see you or you can't see where you're going. And then, yeah, if you're off-roading, it kind of destroys the trails a lot. So people tend not to off-road either at that time.
Because as we talk about off-roading, you then got into mountain biking while you were over there and started doing some mountain biking racing. Now, had you mountain biked at all prior to this in the UK?
I mean, I kind of had, but I'm not actually saying it was like mountain biking with any degree of skill. It was sort of like bashing around on trails when I was a child or like mountain biking experiences. Like you do a day here, but not actually anything like serious, like going out and, you know, sort of doing like 4 hours out in the outback with the local clubs.
I imagine what you're talking about there is it's just so different to bumbling along on the trails back at home to actually starting to focus on this is the type of riding that I'm doing for hour after hour. And how did racing then fall into it?
Kind of by chance. So the local groups, who like a Tweed Valley mountain biking club and the local bike shop that I actually ended up working for, also did a lot of off-road riding, quite varied stuff. And so from there, most of the people that I met were more mountain biking than road focused. I started hanging out with them. Some of them were putting on a local race series and they were like, hey, you should give this a try. So my husband was very, very against this and was like, no, you'll just hurt yourself, and like putting kind of quite negative thoughts into my head at this point about it. But I gave it a try anyway, and it turned out I was reasonably good at it. I had enough fitness to keep up with the really good guys at the start, and then basically all of the sort of like average fitness but very skillful people would then gradually start to catch me and pass me on technical sections until I kind of started getting a little bit more into it and working out really how to ride the stuff properly.
Did you go out to the trails with a specific focus then? I don't want to be the person that gets passed by people that aren't as fit as me and I want to improve my skills. Like, did you actually go to tracks and go, that's it, today I just want to focus on corners? Or did you just come by the experience of actually doing it?
It was the experience of just doing and, you know, going out to tracks with friends who were a bit more focused, who were already racing and needed, like, they knew of specific things that they could work on, and I was basically copying them. So it was kind of instinctive. I didn't really have that much fear of falling off because I could do slow stuff because I've been a courier. So if I kind of needed to think about something, I could approach it very slowly, do it at a low speed first, which I think is harder for some people.
Hand up, totally. That is my problem. I have this is not my story we're listening to today, but just quickly, my problem is that I get scared when I go too fast because I've crashed going at high speeds. And then I get scared. I slow down, but then I get an extra fear come on top of that because I slow down so much and I've crashed going at slow speeds. So it's like, oh no, I'm going too slow now.
Yeah.
And so that fear that you describe of going too slow and being harder for someone, that's definitely a Bella fear.
And that's actually something that I try and work on in coaching as well, that I try and do things with people that will introduce the slow skills for them and deliberately practice them, because then you can start to speed it up. And if you can do it super, super slowly and without a fear of falling, you can always revert to that. So
did you enjoy the mountain bike racing scene?
I did. It was super fun. Everyone was really friendly. And yeah, it introduced me to my competitive side, which I think maybe slightly less so now, but I'm not actually that young. I'm now 41. I think a lot of us spend our youth and growing up being told to, like, not be competitive as women, that like that's a bad thing. You play sports, it should be magnanimous in defeat or winning, and you shouldn't be aiming to do any of that really. So it was kind of like, it was a totally different side of myself that I was just like, I really liked this. And I liked pushing myself against other people. And I liked winning when it occasionally did happen. So yeah, it was quite a different experience as well, rather than this sort of like all encompassing, like we should just do sports and be a team. It was like, okay, no, it's okay to be competitive against other people. And there is nothing wrong with that, as long as you know when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate.
Yeah. I've not heard somebody actually call that out, but it's so true. And I reflect back onto my upbringing and also my education and the schools that I went to, which were all women or all girls' schools growing up in Australia. And it was very much that. I mean, we had the extra part where I, potentially like you, Liz, I would never have wanted a purple bike. I was a tomboy growing up, as the term was, and I was always wanting to, play soccer or football or cricket or something like that with my older brother. But I went to a school where the girls weren't allowed to do that. We had school sport, and the only sport that the girls could play was netball. And I hated netball, and I still detest netball to this day because of that. Like, we couldn't even play basketball. But it was definitely that culture of, you're a girl, you shouldn't be sporty. And it is that sort of non-competitiveness thing. It's not necessarily spoken of in that way, but I guess in some subconscious psyche, it's drilled into us to sort of keep that away and not strive for that.
Yeah, and at school, all of the sports that were open to me were ones that I was just not interested in or good at. So I was never a sporty person when I grew up, and I just liked being outside when I was a kid. And that was kind of like what I did, was just like running around outside, building stuff, building tree houses. We had huge gardens. So that side of things I always really, really enjoyed. But yeah, never had an avenue of sport that was open that I enjoyed, that I felt was like good and something I could engage in. And then yeah, because I wasn't gifted at any kind of sports or given kind of attention in that way, that there wasn't any real good messaging to say like, no, you can still push yourself and you can still do stuff, you just got to find the right thing.
Yeah, and you found that with mountain biking while you're in Australia, but you're obviously not in Australia now. You did return back to the UK. Did you stick with mountain bike riding when you got back, or were you back in London city streets and mountain biking trails weren't a convenient thing for you to find and incorporate?
Yeah, so my new collection of bikes did come back with me because it expanded quite a bit. So, my remit expanded from, I had a lovely old steel road bike and a cyclocross bike that was my touring bike because it fitted racks on. So those went out with me, and the cyclocross bike turned into a gravel bike. I bought a mountain bike when I was there. When I worked in the bike shop, I ended up getting a much nicer road bike, which I still have. And the mountain bike just ended up sitting in my friend's garage, not actually being used at all because there just wasn't really the opportunity at the time. And it was gravel wasn't really a thing at that point in the UK. It wasn't really being marketed. So I just kind of joined with my local road club from there. And yeah, it sort of just ended up doing a lot more road rides, social rides. I'd gone back to working in an office at this point as well. So that was my riding time, was in the mornings before work, and then the long social stuff at the weekend.
And did you find that was enough for you at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it was still a lot. So I found time to maybe do 2 hours in the morning before work, because in London, there's this Regent's Park scene. So in the centre of London, Regent's Park has like a circular a circular road route around it. It's a couple of kilometres long, and it has kind of just turned into basically London's velodrome. And a lot of clubs use it. There are always people riding there. It's sort of there's fast groups doing training. There's people who are just like there for laps and going to coffee with their mates before work. So it's, training, it's fast riding, it's social, and there's so many people using it that it's become this kind of like real hub that you can just go to before work. And London is very much like, get up early, do things, work, do more things. You're constantly expected to be doing things. So I just fell into this like pre-work cycling scene that's kind of like ready, set up, ready to sort of swallow you in. And
But I guess there's also like because I can certainly appreciate having made international moves a couple of times, although perhaps more so when you were in Australia because you had your husband's family and I guess his potential little network there to go off initially, but you're uprooting from your own social network to nothing. Coming back to London, did you slip back into your social network then? And so cycling then formed an extra part of that because you could find this quick community to be a part of?
It ended up being a bit different because a lot of my cycling friends, and I got into cycling through being a bike courier, or at least sort of riding more, and that's where I was learning things. All of those people that I would have normally socialised with during the day at work were not riding at weekends. They were riding their bikes during the day, then they'd go to the pub, maybe after work, but I didn't see them so often. So I did see my friends sort of like pre-courier days and still had those networks, but the cycling club that I joined actually became most of my friend group that I see now. And my current partner came from that group as well. It wasn't so much that I could just sort of slide back into where I was before because of that difference in like what my cycling was then versus the cycling that my friends was doing was just completely different.
And so then I guess cycling represented something different to you when you came back as well then. It wasn't your job anymore, which it was before you'd left.
Yeah, but I found that it had sort of become so linked to my mental health that if I didn't find and make the time for cycling and getting some exercise, I lost those endorphins and just didn't feel so good about myself. Actually, to the point where sleeping became a little bit more difficult unless I'd actually got some exercise that day.
Had that been something that had always been present in you, but you'd not identified it because cycling or getting that exercise was just a way of you making a living? So you never had to think of getting exercise when you were a cycle courier because you were probably getting more than maybe you wanted sometimes.
And to be honest, pre that point, I was an absolute party girl. So if that was an issue for me, that maybe that like I couldn't sleep so well before doing these things, like I was going out and drinking, I was going out and sleep deprived a lot of the time, and I was doing so many different things out partying that that I wouldn't have known about it, and I wouldn't have really been able to function doing any kind of exercise either, because I was fairly hungover quite a lot of the time.
I mean, if you were to hold a mirror to yourself now, you would be polar opposite almost. I'm not saying you don't like to, have a good time, but I'm just sort of envisaging when I introduce you, for example, I'm talking about this racing career and stuff. And now you're coaching people and you're participating and doing quite well in ultra events as well. And knowing what I know about the ultra scene, you can't do any of that without dedicating quite a lot of your time to training as well. That can't happen if you're a part. Well, maybe there are some amazing people out there that can have a party life and still do 20-hour training weeks or whatever, but it just doesn't seem compatible.
Yeah, I think they break down somewhere along the way and realise that it either has to be one or the other. So I kind of made that transition whilst I was a courier and just sort of starting out, and it was just so exhausting that I couldn't, I would go to the pub with my flatmates and they'd buy me a pint, and I would be nearly asleep after that pint, and then we'd have to go home, and then they'd go back to the pub without me.
You've been weaned off now.
Yeah, I can't do both. And I did try. It just, it wasn't compatible. I didn't have the energy for both. It was a fairly conscious decision, which do I enjoy more? Am I enjoying riding my bike more, or am I enjoying these crippling 3-day hangovers?
I know which one I'm choosing.
20-year-old me would really hate me right now. They would be like, who are you?
Maybe if you hadn't partied as a 20-year-old, you wouldn't be on this trajectory you are on now. Oh, it's getting this is not a philosophical podcast, so we'll move on from that. But I did want to touch on something that you spoke about there, which is that cycling for your mental health, and you realised that exercise was really important for you in order to feel like you were in a good mindset from day to day.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not really a morning person. However, getting up and just getting out on my bike for a bit, whether it was actually like doing some fast stuff, doing a training session, or whether it was just like a little poodle just to be outside, or just just the commute in, like I just didn't function as well if I hadn't done that. There is a borderline where, as if I got up very early, done a really hard training session, and then came and sat at my desk, I would be a zombie. There's a healthy point in the middle of that where most of the time it just like gives me those endorphins that just sort of like get me through the day, make me feel a little bit more level as well. And if I don't do that, it actually gets like harder to do that later in the day as well. I think the things that you do during the day tire you out a bit mentally, and then trying to get out in the evening is actually sometimes quite difficult. Or I'm like, I'll just finish this one little bit of work. I'll just do this thing.
Then it actually goes the other way on you as well, because you feel like you've missed out or you are too tired, the day's gotten away, especially if you're living in a city. And maybe this didn't impact on you because you were a courier, so you're comfortable with traffic. But I certainly know in Australia, my rides needed to be early in the morning because everyone is still asleep to a certain point early in the morning. And so the roads are quieter. But in the evening after work, everyone is awake. The streets are full. You're not getting as much flow and momentum in your cycling because you're constantly at a stop-start that you wouldn't have otherwise had. And so then if you miss out on not going in the morning, I know for my mental health, I can get to the end of a day and go, I'm not exercising today. And then I would beat myself up about that potentially.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you're like, there were so many opportunities, and I know that I sabotaged myself and just didn't do them. So it does work so much better for me to just like have everything prepped, get out of bed, go and do the thing, have an idea of what I'm going to do as well the day before, so that can all be sorted out the night before, and then I can get out and just go and do it.
In terms of getting out and going and doing it, like obviously you found this passion for being competitive. I don't know whether passion's the right word, but a fire within you and actually seeing how you could go. That was with mountain biking, but you came back to London and life there, and you got into the road racing scene, didn't you?
Yeah, so it was kind of again through people I'd met, because like whilst I'd been shown that, there was this little local mountain biking scene where local people were putting on races on their bits of land that existed in Australia, I knew the Tour de France was a thing. I knew that there were professional cyclists and I knew that there were competitions, but I had no idea that that same pathway existed. So it kind of took people in the bike club to go like, oh, we're going to a race. What? Like, how is this a thing? And so, I went to watch people doing races. People convinced me that I should join in. And like, I didn't enjoy my first race, but was persuaded to try another type of race. So then I really enjoyed that. I didn't know until someone showed me that this whole thing exists, that there's grassroots, there's people who are volunteering their time to set something small up, and there's kind of like, there's this sort of like in between where you've got more organized and professional race organizers putting on bigger events that some of the top domestic UK riders will go to. There's similar things happening all over the world. And then you've got, these big professional races that people were paid on teams to go and do. And, this is all part of the same pathway. And I just kind of was like, I'd never put two and two together, that there was a pathway to get to this like professional racing that you saw on TV. But it's just, I think it's kind of like, it's almost shrouded in mystery a little bit. You don't know that there's a bunch of people hacking around in the middle of the countryside on race bikes doing these things with like rolling road closures, unless you just kind of stumble across it or someone shows you. I think now you get a much bigger idea of what's going on around you through social media. But when I started, social media was, I think, kind of like just coming out of its infancy, and just people really starting to show more of their lives on it, rather than it just being like Facebook showing your friend, or MySpace showing your friend group what you're up to, and maybe putting a few pictures of like your mates at parties up.
You got involved in the road racing scene and actually went up through the ranks. Obviously, your skills and your fitness and your ability sort of projected you through the ranks quite quickly. And you were in the national sort of, on a team competing nationally at one stage then, weren't you, at an elite level?
Competing at an elite level may be like a slightly ambitious way of putting it, but I was definitely at races with elites. So it's, I started out at these grassroots races that local people were putting on. There's quite a few cycle tracks around London that actually have, one has got a hill, one has got tight corners, one's got sprint finish. So there's quite a varied cycling scene around London with lots and lots of different options. So I did get the chance to try different styles of circuit and travel around a little bit and try different styles of road racing circuit, whether they were hilly or they were like attritional. So I got to experience quite a lot despite living in London, and having a lot of races that I could choose from, and I raced a lot as well. So I think that was part of my quick learning experience. Was I didn't have to think about riding a bike quite so much, and my fitness levels were good. So I was actually able to really get stuck into the tactics that were going on. I didn't have to concentrate on cornering because I already sort of instinctively knew how to do that. So I could I'd end up accidentally causing breaks because I'd gone, at lower levels, I'd gone through a corner so quickly on the front that I was then on my own, and people were sprinting to try and get.
People are having to do a mini effort just to bridge the gap to you there as well.
Yeah, so I then you learn how you can use that to your advantage. I ended up being, maybe quite an efficient rider. And I just, because I was able to spend more of my time looking around at people, what they were doing, I learned tactics, and I had some good guidance from people at our cycling club who, were sort of teaching these things, organising training sessions that we could practice things. So all of that together meant that, we had quite a good learning experience. It propelled quite a few of us forwards very, very quickly. And then from there, so the British cycling category system sort of segregates you into different abilities. And once you've got so many points from finishing races, you get 10 points for a win, you get points for sort of top 10. Get enough points, you get a category upgrade. So you move up a skill level. And this carries on until you go from beginners up to elite. I didn't quite get to elites, but I did get quite high up the system, and the type of races you can do when you're at the top become more like those pro races where I just simply wasn't fast enough anymore.
You do wonder, had you come into the system at an earlier time in your life, do you ever wonder what may have been? Do you ever think that, or not really, because you've moved on to other things anyway?
I do wonder if I hadn't spent my teens and 20s drinking and smoking rather than doing any kind of meaningful exercise, maybe. But I think that some people, I don't think I was so old that I wasn't ever going to reach my sort of physiological limit, and I feel like I got pretty close, and I just don't think I'm ever going to be as fast as some of these other women up hills. I'm fine with that, but it did mean that I felt like I'd kind of gone as far as I could with road racing. And whilst I had that, status of being a category 1 rider, there wasn't a place for me to sort of drop down and do races where I could have a little bit more fun, where it was a little bit less serious. I had to wait a few years before I could decrease my category racing and do that.
So is that also where cyclocross came into it a little bit as well? Because you did move into participating in cyclocross events, and you still do, if I have this correct.
Yeah, cyclocross is so fun, and it comes back to actually it's really skillful, and to be good, you have to be fit, but you also have to be very, very skillful. And there's this wonderful sort of middle area that you can go in, and once you kind of start to get the hang of things, you're like, well, I can really see quite easily the things that I need to practice, and you're all kind of thrown together. So you've got people who are elites and people who are really not very fit and just starting out, all in the same race when you're racing locally. And it's just this wonderful kind of melting pot, because you're racing the person in front of you, you're trying to stay away from the person behind you, and that's kind of it. And you can very easily see what you need to get better at, and you can make up for lots of fitness by just being able to go around a corner better and practicing those things. So it's not purely just fitness. And road racing, in order to be able to be skillful, you have to have a certain fitness level too when you get up to those higher sort of levels. When you're starting out, you can learn so much, and you can draft a lot. Things aren't quite as quick, and you get the opportunity to learn. But where the higher up you get, if your fitness levels don't match, or you're physiologically not just as gifted as I feel that I'm not, then you can reach a plateau. Whereas cyclocross, anything that has a lot more of a skills element to it, you can always get better at something. Even if you feel like, yeah, I nailed that last time. Races change, courses change, it rains, stuff gets muddy. There's always something that you can go like, I could have done that better. And that makes it really, really satisfying.
And there's an extra element of there's something else that self-motivates you to keep going as well, as opposed to being put into a category system but realising that maybe you're never going to be at the pointy end of where you want to be in that area. Whereas with cyclocross, it's not about the pointy end, it's about your own personal goals within the race, your own race within the race, if that makes sense, which sounds great. I mean, I love watching cyclocross, and I say this unabashedly as someone who didn't understand it before moving to this side of the world and used to think cyclocross, why are people running with their bikes? This is ridiculous. And then you watch it and you go, I think they're possibly some of the most fittest people in the world with the best skills in the world.
Yeah.
Sometimes poor clothing choices. There seems to be a subculture of like wearing white and getting it muddy seems to be a thing, which I don't quite understand, but maybe there's cyclocross sponsors which are like Nappy San or something like that, like laundry detergents or something. I actually want to fast forward a little bit to your ultras. I feel there's such a big difference here from going to the cyclocross race, which is short and sharp and 45 minutes or an hour, to all of a sudden signing up for a ultra endurance event, which is more about being able to endure for hour upon hour upon hour, as opposed to maybe necessarily having mad skills on a short course. How did that come to be for you?
Slightly the fault of COVID, slightly the fault of just the internet marketing me things, slightly the fault of a friend going like, hey, we should go and do the Dirty Reaver. I was like, yeah, fine. What's that? 200 kilometres on gravel. Yeah, I'm sure that'll fine. I'm sure that'll be fine. And then when it got close, I was like, I've not ridden for that long in a very long time. I hadn't actually done any of those long rides for kind of so long. I did sort of 4 or 5 hour training rides for race training. So I came into this was like, oh my God, this is going to be such a long time. And came out of it like, actually, that was really good. I had the highs and lows of me really not planning any nutrition. But I was like, oh, you know what? Actually, I enjoyed that. And it brought a lot of the sort of the long distance stuff back and being outside in a new place that I was kind of getting from doing national series. So, this sort of like top level of UK road racing, where we'd go all around the country to do these races in spectacular places. But I wasn't lasting very long in the races. So I was driving for 4 or 5 hours to do an hour and a half, do a bit of a team job for the amount of time I knew I could stay in a race, and then waiting for them and then coming home for another 4 or 5 hours in the car. And, I was getting a lot of adventure into one day, the same amount of traveling, and so much more buzz out of it that I kind of started looking at longer things. It wasn't that long after that COVID reared its ugly head. I was furloughed for about 4 months and basically decided that I was just going to ride my bike for pretty much all of that.
Make the best of a crappy situation.
Yeah, and just kind of like look after my mental health and make a lot of cake, eat a lot of cake.
Cake makes the world better in my mind. Liz, ultracycling is now something that's on your radar. You're loving the idea of combining your zest for cycling all day into something which maybe links up a bit of your competitive nature as well in terms of signing up for races, because not everyone signs up for an ultra race looking at being at the pointy end of the field. And I know that for the first few races you certainly were, and you've achieved some podiums as well. Did you sign up with a view in mind of being competitive?
No, I signed up with the idea that I was just going to have a really good time and enjoy the event. So the first event that I signed up for was Badlands, and it was because of this absolutely beautiful video that they put together. And I can't remember where I saw it on the internet, but it probably was making the rounds on Instagram. And I was like, oh, where's that? I want to go there. That looks amazing. This sort of drone shot of cyclists weaving through the Garafe Desert. It's just sort of spectacular rock formations on this beautiful, endless gravel trail. And it kind of like, it hooked me. And I was just like, where is this? And then I realized it was in southern Spain. And it was actually an area that I'd done road cycling before and ridden through the mountains there going like, I wonder where that gravel track goes. I wonder where that goes. Where does that go? Turns out they don't really go anywhere. But the combination of those two things was like, I want to do that. Oh, it's 750 kilometers off-road. It'll be fine. I'm sure it will be fine. And then the process sort of started of me going like, right, how do I get from this, yeah, I can do multiple hard days of training for road racing. Like, how do I get to riding for like 20 hours continuously before I have to flop down and have a little bit of sleep on the sand? And what kit do I need to get there? So I could draw on quite a lot of my experience in previous bikepacking and traveling and sort of put all of that together. But I kind of didn't imagine that I would be racing for podiums. I went into them with quite a lot of knowledge, not necessarily still quite the right setup, but it was good enough to get me a good placing. From there, it's just, every time now I'm doing a long ride or something that I can learn from, it's just looking at it all afterwards and going like, what can I improve?
If I just quickly reflect back on, from you seeing this drone footage, advertising Badlands, signing up to turning up to the start line to see how the event went, how long did you have to train to turn yourself into an ultra endurance athlete?
A year longer than I thought I did because of
of course, COVID. Oh, the pandemic, of course. Was that good or bad then? Did you find that helped you stay motivated, or did you find it a struggle to maintain the motivation to train for an event that had been cancelled and you were hopeful that would be rescheduled?
I stayed motivated. I was kind of just like really hopeful that it would happen, and potentially it was going to happen later on in the year. However, my office weren't really sure that I would be able to quarantine and still do my job effectively. So whilst they let me have the time off work, I was not really supposed to leave the country. So they kind of, they just made me a little bit uneasy. Like, what happened if you went and did it and came back and had to quarantine, but we actually needed you to come and do some of your work in person, then, that's going to be an issue for us, which is kind of okay, but also it was a bit sad. So I went to Scotland instead and sulked around the Highlands instead of riding Badlands.
Which would have been fantastic nonetheless. Not a Badlands, right? I mean, again, we're talking contrast here, and we've spoken about it a few times with the different things you've done with your cycling. But the desert in southern Spain and the Scottish Highlands, I feel, are on different sides of polarity there in terms of
yes.
In terms of layers of clothing required.
Sand riding versus
do you need
bogs.
sunscreen? Do you need waterproofs? You have done really well in your ultras, in those first ones. So, Badlands, I think you came third. You followed it up with second place in Wild West Way, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
You've also then gone, I don't want to say to the other side, but you have had a different experience in ultras events. It all hasn't been smooth and rosy and podiums for you either, has it?
No. So because of COVID, the first event that I actually did was Dales Divide in 21. Just after COVID, things weren't really open yet. Whilst the first 2 days were an incredible riding experience, my kind of naivety at the weather and how quickly that could change and just general conditions meant that I hadn't got my waterproofs on when a storm had come over, and we went from fairly cold conditions but dry and sunny pretty much the entire way round to suddenly being on the top of Cam High Road in the Yorkshire Dales where it was -2 and gale force winds and sideways hail, and pretty much everyone at that time scratching from hypothermia. And there was like maybe a top 10 of riders who had all got through very quickly and were being all smug and dry down at the coast, to a section of us who had just got stuck out in the middle of it. And then everyone who was a little bit slower back in the field were okay because they were on the top of a mountain when the storm rolled over and were able to deal with it a little bit better. So it's informed kit choices. It's informed me being a lot more aware of what the weather is going to be doing at any given point on the course, and sort of a level of self-care that needs to happen during these events. So that was a rocky start. I was going for the podium. It was good in the sense that I knew that I was going to be able to complete the entire course because I was quite close to the end. If it wasn't for the fact that I kind of had made some errors in my planning and then in my actual execution at the time. So when Badlands came around, it was a very different race, given that from hypothermia, I was going to try and have to prevent hypothermia. And I knew it was going to be mid-30s, and I'm not great in the heat. So on the first day, on the first hill, within the first 4 hours, and I was really struggling, I knew that I had basically just had to reset any expectations that I'd had of being able to ride fast up hills to how am I going to survive this heat? Because it ended up being a heat wave, and the locals were like, wow, this is hot. I think my Garmin topped out at 48 degrees. I think if I hadn't have had that experience of scratching in the first race, I wouldn't have just completely scrapped the first plan and gone like, right, how the hell am I going to get through this heat? And realised pretty much within the first few hours that the game plan was going to have to change, and I was going to have to change my behaviour, where I was sleeping. My eating still kind of remained the same because I planned for low appetite due to heat anyway. It was a learning experience that I'm really glad that I had in order to be able to ride through Badlands, especially as when you travel to a race in another country, you're investing more time and effort into that and you want to finish it. And the aim is always to try and finish these things, not to place them. So I was like, right, reset that expectation. How am I going to finish this race?
Actually having that conversation with yourself, going through that thought process of actually not necessarily managing expectations, but managing ability to actually be able to keep going. Like you said, it was total different weather systems and weather extremes that you were dealing with, but having had the experience of having to scratch because of bad weather, just because, knowing then that you had to have a game plan in mind that would get you through this stretch. Because that's another element of ultra races. The weather plays such a big part of it, but because the field can be so strung out, there's an element of luck involved in terms of where you are when and what sort of weather may hit as well. Like a top 10 riders in an event might miss something. The rest of the field might get strung out. Or the top 10 conversely might hit a freak storm and everyone else could be fine. So it sort of turns the race up and on its head at times as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, this is not my race experience, but I think in the races like the Tour Divide, where you're racing through America and you've got a lot of these sort of like hard packed roads that are essentially peanut butter mud, if you are in part of a field that can get through before a storm and the other part of the field has to wait for a storm to blow over, that road becomes, you have to walk that. So that can have such a big impact in off-road races. I mean, this is quite an extreme example, but yeah, it can have a big, big impact on off-road races when conditions sort of snap change.
The weather is one thing, but in ultra events, often the other thing that can give out is the body. And I know it's cliche, and it's true to some degree that mental strength and mental resilience is something that you need to have within yourself as well, to draw on, to keep going and to keep pushing yourself through. But there can also be this walking a fine line between the mental resolve that tells you to keep going as opposed to potentially the mindset that's looking longer in terms of not this is the event, but, months and years down the track of actually maybe I need to stop and not give myself something that's going to turn into a chronic injury that's going to impact me differently. You've had that experience as well in ultras too, haven't you?
Yeah, so in the Wild West country, I probably wasn't quite fit enough to really push myself in the way that I did, but like mentally I can push myself quite hard, and I've done many years of varying forms of racing where that's probably the number one skill over anything else. Is like, right, if you want to perform well and you're racing against someone, you need to mentally be able to push yourself. So I came out of that with a bit of a neck niggle, got some like mid back stiffness, and I'd left myself a really, really small gap between that and my next race, which was All Points North. So I knew that I was going into All Points North with problems. And I'd also, I'd planned other stuff. I'm not just doing races. I'm going on adventures with friends. I happened to be doing my assessment for mountain bike leadership shortly after All Points North, and then booked in some work as a guide after that. So I couldn't injure myself further. I knew I needed to come out of that race still being able to ride a bike in relatively good form relatively soon. So I went into it with the aim of riding through the first night, because that's not actually something that I've already done. I've never ridden all the way through a night sort of continuously. So I wanted to see how far I could get doing that, what it felt like, what my low patches were going to be like. So I kind of approached it with curiosity. I know that probably I do need a bit of downtime at night, because I was a blathering mess mentally the day after. Everything was it makes everything hard anyway, a lack of sleep, but I was like not really prepared for how mentally tough that was going to make the next day.
Can I ask, was that the next day, as in you've gone through a night and then the preceding morning and afternoon, or is it the next day, as in after the next following night?
Yes, so it was within that same 24 hours. The morning was kind of okay. I stopped for lunch and was like, holy crap, what has happened to my wrists? They'd been sore, but I noticed that like the swelling that had come up and my back was sore. So I stopped, had lunch, reset, and was like, okay, had a load of coffee. And that the next section was really, really tough. Kind of like hit that mid-afternoon lull where I was just sort of like really sleepy, really not feeling very great, but I still wanted to carry on and like see where I could get to. But then this wrist problem just carried on getting worse, and is what caused me to stop, because I've had problems relating to, nerve damage in my hands when I was a courier. And don't really feel like you have the option to stop a lot of the time for injury when you are a courier, because you don't earn any money at that point. But this time around, I was kind of like, right, I'm going to stop. I'm going to spend the night somewhere. I'm going to see what happens the next day, how I'm feeling, have a sleep before I make a major decision. And then the next day I was like, still not good enough for me to potentially have this problem, like over my entire summer of like fun stuff I've got planned. So I did have a little cry on the phone to Ange, the organizer. And she was like, you're making the right decision because you've slept on it and you're fed. Never make a decision on an empty stomach. Giving yourself time to think about it. And like, if that's still what you think is going to be best, then, that's what you should do. Yeah, so I was kind of really, really disappointed that it wasn't, it was an injury that was different to the things I'd also been working on and strengthening, but kind of like entirely understandable at the time.
Just what you've experienced there in multiple ultra events, you've run the full gamut of, you've had weather impact you and made you change your game plan, weather impact you and have to make you scratch, or you've managed yourself differently and actually come out with a podium. But then you've had other injuries that have come out of left field that have made you have to think about, well, hang on, how is this impacting me after this race? Can I still do my job? Will I be able to do the fun things if I keep continuing? So you have pulled out, scratched as the terminology is in ultra events, to stop that from happening. But it hasn't stopped you entering ultras. So I feel like you're someone who's got the resilience but also the mental nous to sort of build up your own little deposit of bank of experiences or things in your repertoire from experience that you can draw on to prepare and actually race these events differently now. I realise that was a really wordy way of putting all that. I'm a wordy person, as people probably already know. But you are still entering events. And in my intro, Dale's Divide only ended, you were doing that a few days ago, really, or just a week and a half ago, I think it might have been.
Yeah.
How has that experience led you to turning up to a start line differently? Do you find you're in a different mindset at the start line now than you would have been in your early events?
Yeah, definitely. I think with Dale's Divide, like I have just had like a super, super busy winter. I've found it quite hard to train mentally this winter. And so I know that like I don't want to repeat of last year where, I tried to race the first race and it went to plan mostly, but I ended up just completely destroying myself afterwards, where I didn't want to ride my bike, like not in the best place to go and do another race. So I've planned longer in between races for a start this time. And the way I wanted to approach this one was, I bought a new mountain bike this year. I wanted to do it on that to provide a different experience, just to see what that was going to be like. I am still sort of navigating how to eat properly for these things, because I don't have any problems with eating. I love eating. However, when it comes to these events, flavor fatigue, not wanting, like becoming a massive toddler with myself and having a strop about the food that I brought with me, with myself. I'm just not wanting to eat here, and how do I navigate that? So, I made myself an actual nutrition plan, broke it down a lot more into like, I actually have to do this and seeing it as a job as part of it, rather than a lot of the time eating is for pleasure. It's something that we enjoy. We are imaginative with what we cook a lot of the time. I really enjoy cooking. So it's trying to kind of make it more into a job with a set of rules, and I have to do it like this in order to get an outcome, which kind of is against like what I normally do with bikepacking and touring, but it worked. I didn't fight with myself about it. So I've been using it as an opportunity to try different approaches. I'm still not racing for position. I'm still trying to find an optimum way for me to perform well at these things and finish them. So when I went into Dale's Divide, I didn't think about giving myself the option of the 400-kilometer version at the start, but I gave myself permission to take longer rests at night to make sure that I could get my body through this. And it turned out that actually I needed to give myself more rests by doing the 400-kilometer version. But it was nice to kind of know that was there, not completely consider it at the start, and have that plan to do the 600 with more compassion for myself. And that was the aim of it. So, you don't have to go into these things. Once you've kind of got the experience, you're like, I know that, I'm pretty sure I can finish these things. I know that I can push myself and do well, but you can still approach these things and try new things, try new nutrition, try new sleep strategies, try new equipment, and see what it does and be curious about it.
Yeah, and when you use the words there, like giving yourself permission and being compassionate towards yourself as well, it's sort of a way of mentally reminding yourself that you don't need to turn up to an ultra as a way of seeing who can endure the most misery and still get to the finish line first. I feel like there's an element of ultras which is about that curiosity of what you can do, but there's also a zest of adventure involved in it as well. Often you're joining ultras because you like the terrain, you like the area, you want to see something new, it's all involved with pushing boundaries because, hey, as you said, you could choose to do all of that on a 10-day, really slower, nice and steady bikepacking trip.
And I'm not, I'm persistent. I can perform well with minimal sleep at these things. I can endure quite a lot, and I do know that. And I know that I'm not purely at the pointy end of Brilliant's race. The people who sort of turned up and maybe they didn't have the best plans for themselves, but who were the true pointy end of Dale's Divide. I wasn't there, and I wasn't there mentally this time. I just wanted to actually have a really nice time, and I definitely achieved that. I definitely had a lot of fun, and I had a lot of great chats with people, and a really good social experience as well. So, I don't want to always make it about suffering. I did that at West Country, and whilst the route was great and I did enjoy a lot of it, I spent a lot of time on my own, and I spent a lot of time in pain, and more pain than I really wanted to be in by the end of it. So you can still do these things and still have a lot of fun doing them, and still not need to think about it as right, actually I can really push myself and suffer, and that's how I'm going to get through it. No, actually, if you can plan so you can treat yourself nicely sometimes, or most of the time, you can have a much better time and enjoy it. And I think actually at the end of Dale's Divide, so in the women's race, at the very pointy end was Molly Weaver, who was I think she was in the top 10 before she scratched. And then Vicky Shaw was second, and she got really sunburnt and sick, and so scratched. And I think she had a stomach upset, so maybe there was that combination of getting all your stuff dirty and kind of off-road riding. There was the danger that you might ingest some cow muck. and it might give you an upset stomach. So then I think the next two were Sarah Rose and Jade Field, who had been working with trying to get some increased women's participation for it. And Sarah I saw on the last day, and she was clearly pushing herself. And I think she realized that she was in the lead and she really wanted to stay there, but she was having enormous problems with eating and had just reached that kind of really low point where she was just kind of like able to keep going at a bit of a slow ebb and was really like mentally pushing herself. And then Jade, who had had a few setbacks, remained pretty jovial, rested a bit more, and I think the most importantly had stayed on top of eating and being kind to herself, actually overtook her in the last kilometre and came in first. And it was that close. But at the same time, it was such a different view of these two riders on the start line, where Jade had managed to like pick herself up and keep eating and nourishing herself, where Sarah had a really tough time at doing that, and then just at the end was just really quite sad about it. And when I saw her sort of riding, she was just like really not in a good place, and I was like, right, okay, I really want to finish like Jade now and just really keep enjoying it. And I think I got the right mindset, and I need to keep that mindset and carry it on.
I love that idea that you've been able to almost take yourself out of your own event and through observation remind yourself, this is what I want to do. And you said it's not about not pushing yourself, it's just a different mindset and a different approach to setting yourself up for success. And I use success in different ways. I'm not talking about podiums, I'm just talking about setting yourself up to, not riding through injury, not enduring something that maybe isn't correct for you, but also setting yourself up to do the right things to maybe get you to the finish line in a way that you've also enjoyed, use the word enjoyed in inverted commas, getting to the finish line as well. Because there is an element, it doesn't matter what you do, there is an element of fatigue and pain that just goes with ultras as well, unfortunately. I want to spend a little bit of time quickly talking about what you're doing now with your coaching business as well. That's very linked to what we've been talking about throughout in a way, and how cycling has shaped what you do.
Yeah, so my sort of coaching experience started when I was back in London, and I think I touched briefly on some of the experience I had within my club of having people run race-specific training sessions. And I had the opportunity to work with the guy that became my coach for quite some time, Ian Watson. He now runs what was Cycle Team LDN and is now Hutchinson Brother UK. Hopefully I've got that right, but it's gone. I was part of that sort of initial setting up of teams where he was imparting his knowledge from having raced for most of his life and really enjoying teaching women how to race, getting into it, teaching them the skills, coaching them fitness. And so I was able to work with him in imparting a lot of the skills that I'd learned, partly with him, partly through my life so far, into some of these women's training sessions, riding with them and mentoring some of them on teams, sharing the experiences that I've gone through. And I just sort of found that as just such a enlivening process. I enjoyed doing it for myself. I always came away from these things buzzing and just really enjoyed sharing what I already knew, discussing these things, and hopefully teaching people competition is okay. There's so much enjoyment to be had in sport, even if you're not sporty, like in your mind. If you're intentionally training, then yeah, actually you are an athlete, and like don't be scared of saying that out loud or thinking it. And then kind of from there, I did, once COVID happened and kind of went away and British Cycling were putting on courses again, started doing their courses to learn more about coaching, learn how to articulate the skills that I kind of already knew and wanted to pass on to other people. And like, being able to articulate them is quite important, and how to structure sessions so that people can get the most out of them. And so I've done some of these courses. I'm now accredited to coach people for road, cyclocross and mountain biking. I kind of did cyclocross and mountain biking because gravel is a bit of an overlap. They don't do gravel, but this is kind of like, it's going to be growing. And at the moment now I'm working with several different clubs where I live, doing a lot of women's outreach, work with one of the youth clubs in this area. And most of it's all very practical, hands-on skills, what to do in bunches, A lot of it's race specific, some of it is women's specific or women's only. And then with the clubs, I do a lot of road safety, group riding and group riding drills. And yeah, I also work part-time as a mountain bike guide as well as my office job. So it would be amazing if it can all come together, that I can just show people how to ride bikes better as a job. But, you know, we might be getting there soon.
It's definitely building. I think there would be momentum shift. Yeah, the selfish part of me wants to collaborate with you and get like a women's camp here in the Pyrenees. I'd have to be involved as someone to be taught by you, though, and get some better downhill skills. I see that there is a need out there, and I feel because you have lived and breathed a lot of what you're advocating yourself, and that's been your own, if I use a buzzword, journey to here as well, in that you've had to convince yourself that it's actually okay to be an athlete, it's okay to be competitive, it's okay to want to progress and do things better. Because you've lived and breathed that, that's why you're buzzing doing these sessions and teaching these skills. And I think that's fantastic. So what's the name of your coaching business and how can people find you out there and sign up?
I haven't really thought of like a formal name, just Liz Hughes Coaching and Guiding. My website is liz.bike, so really nice and easy to remember. It's quite basic, but you can get hold of me there. And then I share loads of things on Instagram as well. So I am a Bike Pixie on Instagram. And that's kind of semi-personal, semi-racing, semi-coaching. And yeah, at the moment, I'm sort of taking on some athletes for fitness training as well. So really guiding them in like how to improve their performance.
Fantastic. And for all my listeners, I'm going to be providing links to all of Liz's contact points there in our show notes so that you can follow up on this as well. And definitely, if you're in the UK, definitely look at taking advantage of this. I think it's such a great opportunity to draw on someone's experience like Liz. To have her as a coach would just be immense, I think. So, Liz, oh my goodness, we've been chatting for so long, but I know there's so much that we haven't even gotten into. But I do finish my show with asking the same two questions of all my guests. And the first one is, if you had to choose between riding up a constant hill all day or riding into a constant headwind, which of the two struggles do you want to pick?
A hill every time. I mean, there'll be a downhill at some point.
Yeah.
And I'm not like a big, powerful rider anyway. So like riding into a headwind, like, I just get someone to draft. Someone will overtake me and I can draft them and it will be fine. So
I'm keeping score of this now, and can I just say there are not many headwind lovers out there. I'm definitely by the end of this season I'm going to give up the ultimate numbers. But even through my own little polls, there's a lot of us climbers out there, it seems.
The other thing with that one, if you're riding into a headwind and it's probably going to be flat and boring, and if you're riding up that much of a hill, there's going to be some views. There's going to be some views and it's going to be beautiful.
Love it. Yeah, it's all about the visual scenery to me as well, and the experience and the feeling of achievement. That I have not gone far, but I have gone far vertically, as opposed to I haven't gone far and it's been flat, and I've gone really slow because it's a windy day. Okay, so last question, Liz. You have 4 hours to spend cycling on a day, and you can choose to have a 4-hour solo ride or a ride with your friends and company. Which one are you going to be choosing?
Oh, well, I don't know, actually. It depends on my mental state, I think. Some days I can ride for so long. Yeah, I can do ultras, fully on my own. But sometimes it's just nice to also decompress with your friends. So I don't know. I can't choose.
Oh, fence sitter. I'll allow it. Interestingly enough, no, it's funny because there's some people who are very quick and snappy. And if they are, it's generally always that they want to ride on their own. And if they aren't, it's because they know that riding on their own fills them and refuels them in a different way mentally, but they also love the experience of friendships as well. And so then they're generally fence sitters. I'm actually trying to think, have I had somebody? There must have been a guest that has chosen to be with others.
I think a lot of your guests do quite solo things though, so...
They do. There is that trend line as well, isn't it? Because I guess ultimately, whether it's going on an ultra or an epic long distance round the world cycle tour or anything in between, the common element is that there's generally a lot of hours spent on your bike and often on your own. Yeah. So you have to be comfortable with your own company in some respect and get to like doing that too. Liz Hughes, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for spending so much time sharing so much of your story with our listeners. It's been so great to get into it and find out more details about you and how you have built this life around the bike in a way.
Oh, it's been really nice chatting with you, and I'm reliving a lot of it.
Very good. Awesome. I really enjoyed that discussion there with Liz and just sort of going through how much the bike has featured as a constant in her life. It's really clear that Liz has a passion for this area in the sport. So by all means, if this is an area that you feel like you could have some assistance in getting into, then definitely reach out to Liz and see if some of the areas that she has on offer in her coaching business could be a good fit for yourself. I hope you've been enjoying listening to the new episodes I've been bringing to you each week and the unique stories from each of my guests. It's really clear that no story is at all the same as another. Everyone has their own different variation of how a bicycle has impacted them on their life and the types of adventures that they have gone on. I'm really excited also knowing what's up next and what's to come in future episodes as well. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure that you're actually following it on your podcast player, and that way you'll be notified when new episodes are released. And of course, if you yourself are one of those people who have had themselves an amazing adventure on a bike, get in touch with me, send me an email to podcast@seatravelride.com and request to be interviewed as a guest for the show. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.